pleasure.
Well, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you here today, the Honourable Rachel Notley. Thank you for being here. I've arranged for the sun to be right there, it's perfectly. It's highlighting your hair. That being said, thank you so much for being here today. We've had multiple leaders address our group today, and the message that we're taking to each of you is that we are the Mid-Sized Cities Mayors and CAOs Caucus, representing 22 urban municipalities, 35 provincial constituencies, and 1 million Albertans. So, Premier, what we feel our strength is, our best strength is to our group, is that it rests with our diversity. We are spread across the province, 22 different municipalities with ranges of population, but we would like your attention, and we feel like we've got it today, so thank you for being here. So with that being said, I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction and then have you come up and speak, and then we'll ask you, if you would, please join us back at the table. And we've done that on purpose to have you a part of our group today, and this is the way that we meet. And I think it speaks volumes that this is the relationship that we want to have with the provincial government. So thanks again for being here. So, Premier Rachel Notley made history in May of 2015 when her team was elected to form government in Alberta. It would be way easier to speak from these. Now I know why you have them. When the global price of oil collapsed and families across Alberta lost work, Premier Notley focused in on helping everyday people. Together with her team, she has worked to create good jobs, defend the hospitals, schools, and public services that all Albertans rely on. And she's fighting hard every day for new pipelines. Born and raised in Fairview, she lives in Edmonton with her husband, 2 kids, and 3-legged dog. It is my pleasure to introduce to you all Honourable Rachel Notley, Premier of Alberta. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff, for that introduction. Let me begin by acknowledging that we are all gathered here today on the traditional territory of the signatories of Treaty 7. And I'd also like to acknowledge the Métis people of this province who share a very deep connection with this land. And I definitely want to thank you for inviting us to be here with you. And I say us because Shay Anderson, our terrific Minister of Municipal Affairs, spoke here yesterday. Now, I heard that Shay described himself as a mid-sized Albertan. I have to say, I can't make the same claim. I am built on a smaller scale, and quite often, I often need to have a couple of phone books travel with me just to see over the podium. So thank you for not making that happen today. But like Minister Anderson, I do believe in Alberta, and I believe in your cities. You represent 1 million Albertans. I know sometimes that communities like yours can feel lost in the focus that sometimes always seems to be going on Calgary and Edmonton. But we know you are major economic players and critical regional hubs. And there are very, very good reasons why people choose your communities. Excellent services and amenities, low taxes and good jobs. And to me, you're a big part of what makes Alberta great. And it is quite incredible to watch the way your communities are growing and changing. So as Jeff mentioned, I grew up in Fairview. And when I lived in Fairview, we spent a lot of time going to Grand Prairie. That was the big trip to the city. And ultimately, I spent 2 years living there studying at Grand Prairie Regional College. And Grand Prairie is an interesting example of how Alberta is changing. It is the youngest and fastest growing city in Alberta. It is growing more diverse, too. And they have GPRC, the college, which is now on track to becoming a fully accredited degree-granting university, which means that more of that younger population is going to be able to stay there and carry out their studies closer to home. And that kind of growth and momentum, cities that are younger and more diverse, cities that offer more and more opportunities for people to put down roots, this is actually one of the defining features of today's Alberta. So, my friends, it's against this changing backdrop that we come here today. and we talk together today. And this is, as you know, the first opportunity really that I've had to speak specifically with this group, though I've spoken with many of you in other settings. And you've heard me speak about our efforts to get pipelines built, efforts that many of you have supported, for which I am very grateful, and once again, let me offer your thanks. And efforts that, for the record, we are not letting up on anytime soon. But in my time here today, before I take your questions, I want to speak a little bit more specifically about how the government that I lead has approached in the past working with all of you, the choices we have made, the decisions we are currently working through together, and our vision for continuing to work with you in the future. And I want to offer up a little bit of commentary on the opposing approaches that will be on offer in the next election. So I'm just going to grab my water here. Also, fighting a lovely little cold, and so I end up getting dry mouth much faster than normal. Anyway, so you've heard from my colleagues who are leading the other parties, and they are, all of them, people that I respect with long records of public service. But I do believe that in some cases we have a fundamentally different view of how we keep our cities prosperous, vibrant, and livable. And I believe that over the last 3.5 years, we have actually faced major challenges together as partners and chartered a better way, one that has provided stability, predictability, and opportunity through a very challenging time. And I believe that work needs to continue. So let's start there. And let me talk a little bit about our work together over the past few years. Now, I don't have to tell you that the downturn has been severe. You've all, in many ways, seen it up very, very close. And many of you still are seeing it right up close. And back in Edmonton, in the legislature, the picture was also very, very stark. We were confronted by resource revenue in free fall. And we faced a very, very big choice at the time. Did we respond to the downturn by cutting the things that cities and municipalities need, basically, raising the drawbridge around the legislature in Edmonton and wishing the rest of you good luck? Or do we stand together, put your stability and predictability first, keep the roads, the schools, the hospitals, the services that your residents, your citizens rely on strong, and then find a way to fortify all of us against the storm? So we chose the latter. And we zeroed in on essentially 3 important ways that the provincial government can defend your residents from the downturn and help keep your cities vibrant. First, as I said, stability and predictability in your funding. Second, repairing our infrastructure deficit and creating jobs, building Alberta for the future. And third, defending the public services families rely on and the services that employ many of your residents at the same time. So let's start with stable and predictable funding for cities and municipalities. When oil prices collapsed, we refused to make the reckless cuts that many people were asking us to make, cuts that we believe would have hurt Albertans and the municipalities within which they lived. And this is a fundamentally different approach than the former government, who would often see your funding as one of the first places to look for cuts when the price of oil took a dive. No, so instead, we stabilized our funding and support for cities and municipalities while we weathered the storm. We didn't make the reckless cuts that make life better for people in your communities, such as the municipal infrastructure that your residents rely on, or the transit systems that we are just now getting on track. And I know that protecting municipal infrastructure funding is a priority for you, and I get it. It's a priority for us too. And that's why we are currently in the process of developing a replacement for the MSI program. And I'm sure you would all like to know where these arrangements are at and why we haven't had it happen yet. We get that too. But what I can tell you is these discussions are ongoing, and we're going to keep working with you on a successor to MSI. We made a very clear commitment to have a new system operational by the time MSI expires and to legislate it. Now, I know you need it in place before it expires because much of your planning doesn't happen in just 1 year. So we're going to keep at it, and I know we're going to get there pretty quickly. We all want to see the same things, I think, from a successor to MSI. We want a system that is prudent, transparent, and sustainable in the long term. And we also want a system that is equitable and fair, both from the province's fiscal standpoint and between the different types of municipalities that exist in Alberta. Big cities, small towns, mid-sized cities, or rural communities. And so I'm committed to doing that, and I look forward to sitting down with Barry and others to continue our discussions on what that system will look like. But you can trust in that commitment because you know our record. We understand the importance of local infrastructure to Albertans. And working out questions of funding levels, they're always difficult, but we're going to keep at it. And what you know from me is that I will fight for municipalities like I have for the past 3.5 years. And I am committed to working with you to ensure that you have the tools that you need to keep building great communities and to see our economic recovery through to where it's actually fully happened for everyone. Now, the second way that we have worked to keep your communities strong and vibrant is by repairing our provincial infrastructure deficit and creating jobs, building Alberta for the future. We began from the premise that a downturn is the time to build and hire, not cut and fire. And here, too, we resisted calls from our opposition to impose more cuts. We did so because slashing infrastructure funding during the downturn would have made life harder, not only for you guys, but for regular Albertans. And also, quite honestly, we knew that building now was the way to do it in the most cost-effective way possible. And in fact, what we're seeing is that the vast majority of our major infrastructure investments are coming in on budget, on time. We're not seeing the crazy overruns that happened when we were competing with $100 barrel oil to catch up on a 20-year-old infrastructure deficit. So, for instance, today across Alberta, over 200 new or modernized schools are underway. And I'm willing to bet that in pretty well each and every one of your communities, at least one school is being modernized or built new. In many cases, multiple schools. Overdue and badly needed new continuing care centres are being built, for example, in Fort McMurray, along with expanded, improved healthcare centres across the province. More affordable housing units are coming in Banff, upgrades to post-secondary institutions in Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, and we're building badly needed bridges across Alberta, like the Peace River Bridge and the Fort Saskatchewan Bridge. And major new interchanges and highway redevelopments are underway in Red Deer with the Gates Ave interchange, around Spruce Grove and Stony Plain with the Atchison Overpass. In Grand Prairie, we're twinning highways and building an interchange. In Leduc, a new interchange is going to help unlock the huge investment interest in the growing region around the Edmonton International Airport. All of these investments have been about creating good jobs, keeping your communities great places to live for families, and helping our economy recover. So this brings me to the third point, or the third way we have worked to support your communities, and that's defending the public services that all Albertans rely on, and the public services that actually employ many of your residents, because so many of you serve as hubs for many of these provincial public services. It is unacceptable to me to say the following: price of oil is down, so I guess your son will have to wait longer to have that bone reset. Or mom can lay for a few days longer out in that hospital hallway on a stretcher. The same goes for saying, price of oil is down, I guess we'll just let people filter their own water or repair their own sewers. The shoulder on that highway is crumbling, well, we'll just let it crumble a little bit more and we'll wait and see what's next from OPEC. That is not a way to run a province, especially not one with as much going for it as ours does. Albertans deserve better, and we are making sure that they get it. And so we kept funding for healthcare, stable and predictable, and the same with education. We didn't put your nurses into the unemployment line, we kept them at the bedside. We didn't put your teachers into the unemployment line, we kept them in the classroom. And why does this matter to your governments? Well, I think we know, because we all want your communities to be places where Albertans can build lives for themselves and the people they love. And if they're struggling with that, you too will see the consequences each and every day. And maybe this is the mother in me talking, but from Grand Prairie to Red Deer to Medicine Hat, I believe your cities deserve to be places where kids can get a good education. can get training or a degree close to home, then stay close to home and build their good lives there. Sunday dinners are always better when the grandkids or the kids live close by. So my commitment to you is to continue to work with you, valuing these stable and predictable funding, valuing strong infrastructure and jobs, valuing the public services that all Albertans rely on. So now with that said, I want to be very clear about something, because this is a conversation with leaders of all the political parties. The fact is, the next election is potentially going to be a very defined one for you and the people in your cities. And it's a choice between the stability and predictability that we have fought so hard to provide versus what I would suggest is instability and reckless cuts. Now, my principal opponent in the campaign is these days trying to soft sell his approach a little bit. So I'd like to talk about that for a moment. We know that the official opposition has talked about returning Alberta to a flat tax. That's one of their priorities. Now, what this plan does is it costs roughly, well, it costs more than this, but one thing that it does for $700 million would be spent giving a tax break to the literally wealthiest 1% of Albertans. And so it will strain public services so that the 1% who already pay amongst the lowest taxes in Canada can pay even less. But these kinds of priorities, like tax cuts for the wealthiest 1%, at the expense of public services and the average Albertans who need them, actually have impacts on everybody, including municipal governments. And I think we only need to look east at a few other governments to see how investments in local government has been prioritized recently by Conservatives. When faced with the same dilemma as Alberta in 2017, what did the Conservative government in Saskatchewan do? They cut municipalities. They cancelled all grants in place of taxes. In Saskatchewan, with all those crown corporations there, thanks to decades of NDP governments, but anyway, that hurt municipalities significantly. In 2018, Saskatchewan cut municipalities again by a further 5%, and they put municipalities on notice to expect even less in 2019. Now that's Saskatchewan. How about Manitoba? Well, in 2017, they significantly cut funding to the Municipal Road and Bridge Program, and then this year they cancelled it, a program that the Association of Manitoba Municipalities described as essential. Let's look at Ontario. New things going on there right now. So they've launched a review into 82 municipalities with a goal of cost cutting. But they've also now told cities and towns that the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund will be reduced significantly when the first budget is tabled. So these are the current records of those provincial governments. And I think that there's good reason, therefore, to expect Conservative opponents in this province to follow suit. Again, not a lot of clarity out there right now, but it's not unreasonable to question these things. Now, in some cases, what's being said is, no, we're just talking about a spending freeze, just 0%, that's all. Well, you know, I think amongst all of us here, we all look at budgets all the time. And we know that there are parts of our budget that maybe we'd love to freeze it at zero, but we just can't. Costs and pressures increase no matter what. So instead, if you're absolutely committed to keeping your global budget at zero, what happens is you are forced to look at discretionary spending because of the other parts of spending that are going to go up. And that means that if someone is serious about keeping spending at zero, they're going to look to those discretionary pots. And I hate to say it, part of that is municipal funding. Most of your funding right now is not statutory. Your funding is therefore easier to go after if that's what you have to do. So the same goes for a lot of health and education funding. And the fact of the matter is that the claim you can freeze at zero without making cuts just doesn't add up. Yesterday, interestingly, the leader of the official opposition said that he was actually going to fund the $1.5 billion for the provincial piece in the Green Line. But he's also said he's going to cancel the Climate Leadership Fund, which is currently the source of the $1.5 billion that will build the Green Line. So then the question becomes, well, where's that $1.5 billion going to come from? Where do you think is going to make up that funding gap? I would suggest look east for some clues. Anyway, now, that being said, I would not be at all surprised if many of you in this room are saying, well, you know, maybe folks are going to have to cut, because the fact of the matter is we do need to get our deficit under control. And fair enough, we are all administrators. We all worry about these bottom lines. We all know we have to look at that. But I'm here to say that I actually agree. We do need to get our deficit under control in a collaborative way, in the partnerships and the kind of ways we've already been working on. Our government is on track to balance by 2023-24. We laid that out 3 years ago, and we are sticking to it, and it's working. So it's a little bit longer than the official opposition would take. But the fact is, we're also not giving massive tax cuts to the top 1%. And in return for taking one more year, we're able to avoid the kinds of cuts that others would have to make. And the fact of the matter is this: we have been consistently meeting or beating our path to balance targets every year. Last year, for example, the deficit came in over $1 billion lower than what we projected in the budget. This year, as of Q2, we are projecting a $1.3 billion acceleration of paying down the deficit. So we are going to continue to be careful, thoughtful, and deliberate, committed to the idea that government is here to help make life better for people and to work with our partners throughout this province in a respectful, collaborative way. So every kitchen table in the province has to feel the effects of the recovery. I think that's my obligation and yours as well. And it must be a recovery that is finally built to last. So my commitment to you is that we can make sure your cities can continue to rely on the stable, predictable funding we've seen in the past. You can continue to rely on investment in a strong, well-maintained, effective infrastructure that allows you to grow and attract more and more investment. And the high-quality hospitals and health centers and schools that folks in your communities need in order for them to do what they do to build our economy. The choice in the next election is, as I said, it's a fairly clear one: stability and predictability versus instability and cuts. And I'm proud of what we have all accomplished working together. And I'm proud that together we are building Alberta for the future. And I look forward to speaking with you more today and over the coming months. So thank you for inviting me here today, and I wish you all the very best, and I look forward to having our little bit of a conversation around our roundtable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Premier. Again, welcome to Cochrane. And thank you for joining us at the table. As I spoke about earlier, this is a reach in collaboration with the government, and I think this is a great first step. So before we get to the questions from the table, I have a quick one, which you mentioned in your address, and you spoke about working with us greater in the future. So we have asked you here today to emphasize our wish to collaborate with you. Will you commit to working with us in the future again as Premier?
Absolutely. You know, I like to, I mean, we've actually done, well, I think everybody here knows, we've done a lot of work in the, you know, municipal governance space. We brought in a modernized municipal government act, one that had been sort of sitting around with sort of nobody actually digging in and getting down to work on it for well, actually almost a decade. And it was an old act and it needed to be upgraded. And we spent a lot of time working on that. And certainly throughout it, our ministers, and I do acknowledge that you've had 3 ministers from us since we've been elected, so I would love for it to have been less, but hopefully you've been happy with all 3 of them. But in any event, they've been very committed to working with all of you and meeting with all of you and being available and being accessible. And we've been very committed to, you know, when we do a round of regulatory changes, well, we put it out and we ask for commentary, and then they come back and tell us what the comments were, and then we revise and we reach out and we say, oh, how about this? And we've tried to do a very sort of iterative process around that, as an example. And then there's been a lot of other, the other thing we've done, I think, is where folks have just come to us organically on a one-off basis saying, oh, well, here's this thing that is really going to be important for our community for economic development or whatever. We've tried very hard to be responsive and to be available. When Lethbridge came to when I was there in the summer, and I got to meet, the mayor, the whole council, all of their healthcare officials, all of their police officials, and there was one other group of officials that were all there to talk about the challenges you were having with addictions in your downtown. We worked very collaboratively to try to come up with a package of things that would help us to partner together to make improvements. And that's what we want to be able to continue to do, understanding that we have an obligation to be prudent as well, but to try to be as responsive as we can.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Well, we've got a few questions, and I think you've actually touched on most of them in your address today, but we'll go around the table, and I think it's a great way of showing the diversity of our group. We got different cities speaking forward, or speaking up today, so I think over here to Red Deer.
Sounds good. Premier, Mayor Terravere, City of Red Deer, thank you so much for being here and for your formal address. As you mentioned in your remarks, you were aware of the necessity for a successor to MSI. Without provincial commitment for a legislated, predictable, and stable funding source, municipalities will not have the financial capability to continue to invest in required municipal infrastructure, especially given the new provincial expectation that we engage in longer-term capital planning through the modernized MGA. In light of the City Charter's fiscal framework, what commitment will your government make to continuing to provide the legislated, predictable, and stable funding that all Alberta municipalities, that all Albertans outside of Calgary and Edmonton require? And we welcome any further thoughts that you have other than those you noted in your address. Thank you.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think, when we, so the idea of putting together a legislative funding framework with respect to MSI is one I think we all agree on, because it gives you predictability and stability, and it makes you less vulnerable to the kind of discretionary budgeting strategies that sometimes come into your world. And so that's why we began talking with people about that, and also the whole idea of incorporating a little bit of revenue sharing in there as well, as far as sort of whether it's a function of GDP growth or whether it's a function of a non-renewable resource revenue or whatever it might be. Climate leadership plan, all that. And so yes, we got the first piece done with the two cities because that work had started much earlier. But we are absolutely committed to continuing that work with AUMA, with RMA, and of course with as members of AUMA, with folks within this group, and to get it done. I can't commit that it will be done before the election is called, just because we haven't made a decision about how long we're going to be in the legislature before that happens. But of course, that there's vigorous conversations already underway. Our minister is fully seized of it, and if we were to have time in the spring session, our view is that it would be something that would be on the legislative agenda this spring, and if not, in the fall. So it's absolutely the piece of work that has to be finished. We did the big cities, and now we need to do start working on the remainder of the municipalities.
Okay, thank you. I think next question is Lethbridge.
Yep. Chris Spearman, Lethbridge. We certainly value the partnership with the provincial government, and my question is about the provincial economy and how that's affecting cities like ours. So mid-cities are feeling the impact of the decline in the provincial economy, and we're working with our communities to try and blunt the impact of the recession. So how will your government partner with mid-sized cities to continue to diversify the economy and create an environment that investors are confident in?
So excellent question. I think that the matter of diversification is extremely important to the province. I've been saying it more and more. We've spent a lot of time talking about getting off the oil and gas roller coaster, but certainly when we got into office in 2015, it didn't really look like there was a lot underway right now to actually make that a reality. And so we've been focusing on diversification just writ large, and let me just talk about that for a moment, and then I'll talk about partnering with cities. But we've been focusing on diversification writ large in a number of ways. Diversification within the oil and gas sector, the non-renewable sector, through our Made in Alberta plan, which is just a little over $3 billion, which is a package that will be used to incent partial upgrading, petrochemical diversification, and potentially refining. And we already, the one announcement we made last week actually has a piece of refining in it already. And so we think that's really important to move our product up the value chain. And so we're looking at projects that are coming from around the province. I will say it's not all going to just live in the industrial heartland. We are cognizant of trying to look at ways to sort of spread that around the province to different regions. The other thing, of course, is renewable energy. And your part of the world, you're already quite there, but through the Climate Leadership Plan, we've been able to incent a massive growth in renewable energy and to bring a lot of exciting investment to Alberta through that. And then, of course, just through the larger plan to engage in broader economic diversification. There's like about 10 programs. I won't drag you through all of them. What we can do, though, in many cases, is we understand that it's often about just creating the environment for investment to be able to come in. And so there's a lot of ways in which the province can pair with municipalities to help create that environment. So, for instance, whether it's like what we did with the City of Leduc to open up opportunities for businesses to come in and invest in that area that's right beside the university or right by the airport and close to or outside of Edmonton, whether it's about working as I said with Grand Prairie, with the working on the recent announcement around the twinning and the interchange, but also the proposals that are coming forward about how we can work together to make some progress on the industrial sector that you want to put in place. Whether it's what we did again with Lethbridge, with Cavendish Farms, where the proposal came forward was about provincial investment in irrigation changes in order to create a setting that was more attractive to Cavendish. Single biggest private sector investment in Lethbridge's history ever. So it's you've got a big picture approach, and then the other approach is to Fort Saskatchewan was another one where we built the bridge because that mattered so much to them. But anyway, so you've got a big picture approach, but then you also have just the matter of keeping the door open and listening to regional economic groups, development groups, and listening to good ideas and thinking about, okay, well, what can we leverage? What's the incremental value of our participation in this, and how many jobs does it create, and what does it allow us to build off? So there's a lot of work that can be done, and really our job is to be open and open-minded about it. Your first Minister of Municipal Affairs was Darren Billis, and he moved into being the Minister of Economic Development. So it's been a nice transition, and we'd like to keep working on that.
Great. Thank you. Moving on to Spruce Grove. Another question.
Hi, Stuart Houston, the Mayor of Spruce Grove. Alberta is growing, and the diversification plan for our province is creating opportunities for transportation growth. This growth creates a need for additional and improved transportation infrastructure, including municipal roads, highways, overpasses, and bridges to sustain economic and social benefits for Albertans. As municipalities are limited in their ability to collect other revenue sources outside traditional property taxes, what is your government's approach to managing and funding transportation infrastructure, and your government's position on provincial responsibility to support municipalities in revenue sharing and investment?
So, a couple things there. So in terms of transportation, as you know, again, to step back, one of the things that we were very committed to right at the outset when we got elected was that we were going to engage in counter-cyclical funding. David Dodge, former governor of the Bank of Canada gave us advice and said, you know, start investing in infrastructure. You've got a huge deficit anyway, and this is a way to keep people employed. And so, as you know, we have been doing quite an extensive amount of work in terms of transportation infrastructure throughout the province. And I'm proud of that. Like, you know, one little one, I mean, just right after we got elected, we went up to Peace River, and every single person we talked to in the course of a 24-hour period began with the Peace River Bridge. It was ridiculous. Like, we'd go into a church, and the pastor would be talking about the bridge. I mean, it's like they had a community meeting before we got there, and, you know, we're all ready. But anyway, the point being is that we went back and we realized that the ministry itself had that as a priority because it was linked to economic development and to the development of that town. And it was actually had been a priority on the top of the list for a very long time, but it kept falling off for, I don't know, I won't explain why it fell off, but you know, we were happy to be able to do it because it was a fundamental part of the transportation infrastructure of that municipality. And so we know there's opportunities always for us to partner, and we know that the pressure is growing, and that even as now we're in a setting where I think we're improving the ability of you folks to plan regionally in a more constructive and hopefully successful way, that actually also offers more opportunity for us as the province to come in and partner in the most efficient and thoughtful and strategic way. So that is the role of the provincial government when it comes to provincial infrastructure. I will say I am not a fan of P3 construction because, quite honestly, it hasn't really performed well. And that's not an ideological thing. People will tell me people might accuse me of it being ideological, but it's actually research-based, evidence-based. That it's very rare that P3s end up being the best way to move on these things. And I'm also not a fan of tolls or user pay because they're hidden fees. And I think that we should be more transparent about things. And you end up having unintended consequences by attaching expenses to this thing because as far as it relates to expected economic activities. So, yeah, so then, of course, the other thing we've done, as you know, in 2012, funding for STIP wasn't stopped, but it stopped taking applications for new programs. And Minister Mason, who's a big fan of building things in the transportation world, talked us all into renewing the funding and refurbishing it in 2017. And as you know, that's now in place, and we've been able to approve a number of important projects for folks. So that's basically where we're at.
Great. I think we only have time for one more question, and we're going to go to Chestermere. I'm not sure where he's sitting.
Over here.
There we go.
Okay.
So good afternoon, Premier, and thank you for coming to sit with us. Marshall Chalmers from Chestermere. The community safety and policing remains a high priority throughout the province. Mm-hmm. With the municipal police funding review currently underway, how can the mid-sized cities work with your government to build a common understanding of the issues, constraints, and opportunities to develop well-informed and equitable solutions to the policing system and related funding?
Well, again, this is another big, you know, we managed to navigate our way through revisions of the Municipal Government Act. And let me just say as an aside, and I think you folks will know this so much more in your position, right? There's never a black and white decision, right? It's really hard to ever make a decision without having a consequence over here. And so it's a lot of, it's really a lot of consensus building and sometimes just negotiating, you know, and balancing of interests. And the fact of the matter is, you know, so the Police Act is 1988 was when it was written. The environment for policing has changed since then on multiple fronts. You know, the nature of crime, the size of your communities, the distribution of your communities, the nature of policing, I would say evolved understanding of the connection between criminal activity, certain types of criminal activity, and social conditions and health conditions. so there's so much that's changed. And so getting into that Police Act, there's going to be a lot of conversations on a lot of things about how we work with how we connect policing and crime reduction to the other work that we as government leaders do in the health and social space, how we reevaluate funding models in terms of what works best and what's most equitable, how we, just the who delivers the service, who's best placed to deliver the service for their community. There's just a lot going on. So we've started a process of reviewing the Police Act. Now, we don't want to review it forever. We don't want it to be like the MGA, where it literally went on for a decade. That is not the plan. What we do want to do is have you folks continue to participate in the conversations that are going on now under the Police Act, and hopefully, we'll be able to sort of break it down to the sort of several key, probably 5 or 6 major areas that need to be reconsidered within the Police Act, and then bring everyone to the table and sort of hammer it out. Because once again, big cities have different views from little cities or littler cities, mid-sized cities, versus small municipalities or smaller towns, and then rural areas. Everybody has a different view of things. And of course, the provincial government has been doing targeted global funding more and more over the last little while. So, we have ACERT, and we have the Rural Crime Initiative, and we have, or not ACERT, sorry, ALERT, and the Rural Crime Initiative, and some targeted kinds of funding. And so we have to figure out, instead of having this sort of grab bag of kind of reactive planning, how do we sort of bring it all together and, again, be more systematic and thoughtful and have a clear framework that everyone understands, that, responds to the issues of each person. And I don't claim to have all the answers. I think you do. And leaders of other municipalities and other stakeholders, community groups, police forces, all those folks. And so that's, I think, what we need to do to bring it up to date. Because I think we're kind of putting Band-Aids on things in a very reactive way, because we're working with a system that is, almost 30 years old right now.
Thank you. So that's all the time we have, and I appreciate, it's all the time you have. So we appreciate you taking your time with us today and showing the significance of our group. And I think I would just like to highlight that I think you spent a couple of minutes in Cochrane today.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
The strength of the mid-sized cities is we had the sunshine out for you, and the temperature turned up.
I know, that's
So
well done.
that is the power of this group
People
right
think
here.
I control the price of oil, which is not true, but apparently you do control the weather, so well done. Yeah.
In Cochrane.
Yeah.
In Cochrane. So again, thank you for being here. We have a little card for you, and I've got a
thank
little
you.
gift bag for you from Cochrane, and I will give that to you when we stand. But just again, thank you for showing us the time today, and we really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much.
The shameless plug.